there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here with this week's episode of the Tuesday Brews Day. Not going to have any time to show gameplay today because I have been on a binge, on a grind with this mono black deck. Went through the entire Diamond tier, so all the way from Diamond 4 to now Mythic, and now I can uninstall Arena and feel satisfied. Just wanted to make Mythic. I've never put the time in to grinding to Mythic before, and had some time this week. Well, not really. All I've been doing is dailies to get to Diamond with just various decks, and decided to see if I could actually go through Diamond with my pet deck. Especially, it got a lot better with the release of Theros. And I'm going to show you the updates to this. I've done this on the channel before. And a little bit of today, we'll talk about some of the matchups and how easy it was, how hard it was to get through Diamond, and if I'd make any changes to this deck, and how I feel if I were to even grind further now into the latter parts of Mythic. As you can see, I'm Mythic 99%. That means I just barely got there, so 99% of the Mythic people in Mythic have a higher ranking than I do. And then if you start playing some games, then that rating goes down, and eventually you get a number, which is your ranking in Arena. And then, of course, if you hit, the top 16, you get an invite to the Mythic Championship. I am not going to even attempt to do that. That is just a huge waste of time, in my opinion. However, I do think this deck is good enough to take to a tournament like a Grand Prix, and I have been very impressed with this list. Most of the decks that I come across are either go heavy into mono black, or they go into like the Rakdos Sacrifice. This is a mono black sacrifice list, and I think it's the best of both worlds. I am not the biggest fan of both Gary or going into another color. I don't think you gain too much from going into red. It messes up the just the 1-2 punch of curving with the mono black. You don't have to worry about like temples coming to play tapped or whatnot. And I think that there's enough cards right now to make a complete deck that you are just picking. Like, Mayhem Devil, of course, is a really good card, but it's situational, whereas Ayara is a perfectly acceptable card in like a sacrifice-based deck. So you got to kind of pick your tool for the job, and I think that mono black has everything you need to do, and therefore has no reason to go over into Rakdos. So anyway, let's just go over the deck tech, and again, we'll get into story time of going from Diamond all the way to Mythic today. So first off, apologize for the crappy layout. Maybe Wizards of the Coast will release like a decent way to look at this in MTG Arena. You'd think with everyone streaming that we'd have something better than this, but still, this is just what we have to work with. So anyway, what I like about this deck is you can run 20 lands. I don't know if this is the right number. In real life paper Magic, we know that Arena cheats. Arena tries to give you loaded hands of lands, and then that way you can kind of rely on having those cards in your opening hand, and then drawing. All this deck needs to really get to is to 4 lands. And what I really like about this deck too is if you do flood out, Castle Loch Twain is the best card, hands down, in the deck. This is the whole reason to be running black right now, is you have a card draw attached to a land. I think this is one of my favorite cards ever printed, one of my favorite cards out of Theros, as it gives the black decks, especially black aggro decks, ways to just continue to fill back up their hand and keep on churning out those threats. Other than that, I'm just running 16 swamps. I don't think you need to run like Field of Ruin. I don't think you need to run like the blasting, whatever the blasting land is. I think that this is just good. 16 and 4. Again, if you're going to play this on paper, you probably need to tweak it up to 22, 23 lands, because it's true variance at that point, rather than this wonky Arena format where you tend to get way more lands than you should. All right, so let's go on to the 1-drops. This is a cat deck, Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven. Everyone knows the combo. Cauldron Familiar, you can sacrifice a food, which Witch's Oven, you can sacrifice the Cauldron Familiar, rinse and repeat. This is going to grind you down against like the Knights matchups and the mono-red aggro matchups and the blue-green flash and the blue-green ramp matchups. Your key 1-2 punch. Gutter Bones is another good 1-drop in this deck. 1-drops are very, very important because they actually trigger Drill Bit on a turn that you want them to hit. You're going to be wanting to cast your Drill Bits on turn 2 or turn 3. So they're like a better Thoughtseize in this deck because they don't require you to pay life. I guess Thoughtseize would be better in this deck, let's be honest, as life isn't an issue. But we do end up casting Drill Bits for 1 mana, and usually it's on the Cauldron Familiars, and the Gutter Bones. I had Knight of the Even Legion as a 4 of in this deck, and this card is just so good. It doesn't have a lot of synergy in this deck. It's just a phenomenal card. And I have cut it down to 2 of because the meta has shifted and we don't really need to be racing decks. Like before, when there was a lot of Fires of Invention decks, I felt like having 4 Knight of the Even Legions was a must, because if you could start to race Deathling Clarion, and your Knight could actually be a very, very big threat and could dish out so a lot of damage. And also you could just continue to pump up Knight of the Even Legion and then force your opponent to do a board wipe, and then the next turn drop a bunch of other threats. So in this particular meta, where it's more like the mono blacks and I guess you still do see some mono reds and you see some blue green. You see a lot of control. This card is just not that great. It's one of the only bodies in the deck that doesn't replace itself, and therefore I've cut it down to a 2 of. The Death Touch does come handy now and again. There will be some green decks you'll come across where the Death Touch they just can't attack into a Knight of Even Legion, and for that reason I like to keep a couple in there. And we do want 10 1-drops. You want to be casting a 1-drop. You don't want to be like first turn Witch's Oven. You want one of these cards to come down on turn 1, because then it curves out for whatever you're doing quite. Your game plan wants that one drop for the drill bits, for the Priest of the Forgotten Gods, and yeah, just to have that initial aggression and make your opponent start reacting to you. On to our 2 drops. We have the 1-2 punch of the Priest of the Forgotten Gods and the Lazotep Reaver. I thought about cutting a Reaver for a 4th Woe Strider. However, I still do like the Lazotep Reaver because of the massive synergy it has between both the Priest of the Forgotten Gods and Ayara, the First of Locktwain. So it's going to create 2 black creatures for Ayara, and it's going to create 2 creatures for the Priest of Forgotten Gods. However, Woe Strider creates a white goat. I wish it didn't. I wish it was a black creature token. Unfortunately, it's a white goat. So for that reason, the Lazotep Reaver token is better than the goat token. But Woe Reader, of course, is such a great addition to this deck. I can't remember what I used to have in the slot. I think it had more Rankles and more Knights of the Even Legion in this deck, but now it's down to the 4 Lazotep Reavers and the 4 Priests of the Forgotten Gods. One of the best draws you can do is like a turn 1 Gutter Bones and a turn 2 Priests of the Forgotten Gods into like a turn 3 Lazotep Reaver, sack the Lazotep Reaver and the token to the Priests of Forgotten Gods, and then have 3 mana to then drop something else and get rid of their threat. Onto our 3 drops, we are going to be running Midnight Reaper. This is one of the best cards in the deck, as it's going to allow you to draw cards. It's another reason why Gutter Bones is in here, because the Witch's Oven, Gutter Bones, and Midnight Reaper can actually be a pretty good threat, as well as you can continue to get back Gutter Bones, and it becomes basically a 3-mana draw spell, lose a life with Midnight Reaper. Then our new addition with the Woe Strider. This one also has some good synergy with the Midnight Reaper because it does allow you to sacrifice on a stick. So no activations, you can just sacrifice a creature and then draw a card of the Midnight Reaper. Unfortunately, you cannot sacrifice your goat token to draw a card, as it is a token creature, and Midnight Reaper does not allow you to draw cards off of token creatures. So that's a bit unfortunate too. I wish we had like a better ability to draw cards off of tokens. However, it's still pretty good with the sacking of Gutter Bones, Midnight Reaper, then recast. If you have something like a Yara out too, you have this good engine of drawing a lot of cards. So the Midnight Reaper and Woe Strider, I think, are very important to how this deck functions. Then we have a Yara. This was a 2 of, then a 3 of, then a 4 of. It's one of the best cards in the deck. It puts a huge clock on your control opponents if you have Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven out. It's 2 damage per activation, especially if you have multiple Witch's Ovens. It allows you to really grind versus the aggro decks, as a Yara is just miserable for them to try to deal with. And that's why I have multiple. So if the first one gets taken care of, then we have multiple Ayaras to finish it up. So I think 4 of is the right number. Then to our 4 drops, I'm only running a 1-1-1 package because each one of these is good in their own situation. I think that maybe if I were to tune this deck even more, I would decide which one's the best. Wrinkle's been my go-to all-star for a long time here. Wrinkle has the ability to make your opponents discard cards, and you can have both players draw cards. I rarely ever use that mode, though, unless my opponent's about ready to be finished off, because this is an attrition deck. You don't want your opponents to have cards. You want to grind them out of cards, because you are very good with card advantage. Your opponents are not as good as you, and so Rankle giving your opponent's cards is bad. The one exception is Drill Bit. It's got that synergy with having your opponent lose a life and draw a card, and then Drill Bit will be online, and then you can just Drill Bit the card out of their hand. That's basically that, or finishing off my opponent's the only time I use that card draw, or if I'm just desperate. But if at that point you're probably going to lose the game anyway. The Sacrifice a Creature is very good in this deck with Woe Strider and Laztep Reaper and Gutter Bones and Cauldron Familiar, all being cards that can come back from the graveyard or get more value. And if the discard a card is very good too, because you'll start to flood with lands, have no need for them, and you can pitch them, or you'll just be flat out of cards, whereas you can get your opponent out of cards. So Rankle, again, has been as much as a 4 of in this deck. The haste is also really good with Rankle. However, I have cut down to a 1 of Rankle as of late. Then we have the Nightmare Shepherd. This is another addition from Theros. This is really good against board wipes. We aren't really aggressive though, so it almost feels like a win more card to me, if you're familiar with that phrase, that if you already have enough stuff out to where Nightmare Shepherd is going to get you advantage, you're probably ahead anyways. So I do like the 1 of, though, that you can curve. It's a 4 for flying for 4. This works a lot better in mono black with getting Gary's back with Woe Strider, Nightmare Shepherd, Gary combo. In this deck, though, it's still pretty decent to against a board wipe. You have like a Yara and some other card, then you can get those cards back and get all the triggers off of Yara coming back in and whatnot. It's a 1 of in the deck. It depends on the meta. It situationally could be better. I've had some pretty fun things with like sacrificing things to the Woe Strider or the Witch's Oven to get them back to trigger off a Yara, but that's like the one time you want to work it off Nightmare Shepherd. It's another angle, though, to victory, and that's what I like about this deck, is it's not a very linear deck. It is a puzzle. You do need to figure situations, how to beat your opponent, especially the sideboard. The sideboard does get very, very tricky of what to put in the sideboard at any given meta time, as well as what to bring in versus particular matchups. Last but not least is Deathless Knight. Now, let me tell you a story how this started. I was trying to build a mono black Devotion deck, and Deathless Knight was pretty good because I was running Cauldron Familiar, which is Oven in the combo, as well as the Midnight Rider, or the 2/3 adventure card that destroys a creature and has lifelink. And so I'm like, Deathless Knight has a lot of good synergy when you gain life to bring it back. It also has really good curve with Grave Merchant of Asphodel. So I tried in the deck, and oh boy, did I love it with Cauldron Familiar, which is Oven. It's another threat. It's a haste creature. It blocks very well and comes back, and it does take your opponents by surprise sometimes with the 4. 4 power is actually quite relevant in this format, as there are plenty of creatures that have to trade with it at that point. And so Deathless Knight, I think, having another residual threat that comes back with any Cauldron Familiar or a Yara activation is good as a 1 of. So it's always good to toy around with other decks and then see if, this actually does fit in a particular shell. Now, would I run more of 4 of? Absolutely not. Like, these ones are definitely cards that I could justify running more of 4 of. Deathless Knight's a cute little 1 of that give you the residual. You don't want to see more than them because you're not going to have the mana to utilize more than one of them. And if you draw it, you draw it. You don't, you don't. All right, so let's look at the sideboard. The sideboard has switched up a lot recently based upon the meta, but all of these are pretty good additions, and there's a few other cards that I have considered or have had in the deck. Right now I have 3 Duresses. I think it's the right number with 4 Drill Bits, because the decks that you're going to be bringing Duresses in, you're not going to be cutting Drill Bits. So gives you 7 ways to rip out cards. Legion's End. Legion's End is very important versus Knights. It's also very good versus Hushbringer decks, and there's quite a few Hushbringer decks. If they establish a Hushbringer versus your deck, you're going to have a very hard time because you are working off of both Enter the Battlefield and die effects. So Legion End is a must for getting rid of them. It's also good versus other Cauldron Familiar decks if they don't have a Witch's Oven out. Same thing with other Gutter Bones. It's pretty decent versus like Mono Black, getting some of their creatures out of the way for Devotion. It's very good versus green because oftentimes they'll be running like either Hydra Crasis Legion's Ends can get rid of. They can get rid of all the elemental, like the lower end two mana elementals. If Nissa has been pumping up the same land, you can kill all of those lands with Legion's End. So I think it's a pretty good card to bring in versus some green decks, a lot of blue-green decks. Mostly Knights is what this Legion's End in, and then for the mono-white lists that are going around, it's a pretty versatile card. It can actually be very good against some of these oddball decks you come across. Noxious Grass, this is just a 2 of as well. I bring it in versus blue-white control because they're running the Hexproof, the 3/5, and a lot of times they have to cast it, have it being the last card in their hand, and so Noxious Grass can actually take care of it. It also is decent versus Teferis. It can kill. I'll bring it in versus Kaya decks. You see a lot more Kaya enchantment decks. Again, you're going to bring it in versus Hushbringer. You're going to bring it in versus any green-based deck. It's very good against. Kills Hydrocrasis, kills Risen Reefs, lots of things that this card gets rid of. So it's good just to have a 2 of. I don't like having more than a 2 of because I don't want to dedicate towards one particular deck, especially a deck that I feel like I could be favorable against. Again, it's a toolbox to bring in those specific ones. All right, so then we have Gavriel Rogue Shadow Mage. This is basically our only hope versus a lot of the grindy control matchups. I'll bring it in versus Fires of Invention decks. I'll bring it in versus Blue-White control, Esper control. There are some Boros control decks running around. There is enchantments like black-white enchantments. So Gavriel I'll bring in versus those particular decks because it's another card that can grind out. A lot of times I don't keep Gavriel alive. It's just -1, -1, -1. And so it's 3 cards for 1 card. Oftentimes they'll kill it too. So it actually takes another card out of their hand even if you didn't get all your negatives off. And it can actually do some decent damage. It's really the discard it's in here for, really just ripping your opponent's hand out and hopefully being able to stop them from, getting that 5th land for Fires of Invention is really what it's there for. They'll pitch land, and then sometimes they'll hiccup, not be able to hit that last land drop to maybe they'll have Fires of Invention out, but can't cast the Cavaliers because you've hit them off that last land. That's basically what Gavriel's here for. I have a brand new addition, which is Plaguecrafter. This is mainly because blue-white controls everywhere, and it's very good against the 6-drop that has pseudo hexproof by discarding a card. If you can just make them sacrifice it, that's a good card. It's got some cute synergy with Nightmare Shepherd, so I think that Plaguecrafter actually gets a lot better with a lot of these cards out of Theros. So I've added it again in the deck with as the meta has shifted to more planeswalkers that, like, sometimes Ashiok can be a bit of an issue. So they put out an Ashiok, you have to attack into it, they block with the token, so they don't have any creatures left, then you can Plaguecrafter. That situation's come in once, but I just think that Plaguecrafter is something I'm toying around with right now as a specific answer, mainly towards the blue-white control deck with that hexproof creature. Witch's Vengeance. So Witch's Vengeance might get cut again because this was a amazing card versus Rakdos Knights. It's also in here for one of our horrible matchups, which is Black-Red Sacrifice. Witch's Vengeance is a way to kill Mayhem Devils. So Legion's End is kind of wonky versus that matchup. Noxious Grass, of course, doesn't hit that matchup. So we do need a way to get rid of Mayhem Devils. Witch's Vengeance is the go-to card to get rid of that specific card. You name Devil, you get rid of them all. But Knights, this was just a one-sided board wipe. There are plenty of other elementals. This can be a one-sided board wipe. There are a lot of matchups where I think it's worthwhile to bring in Witch's Vengeance from the board. So then we have one of my, this would be my last addition, was Ashiok Dreamrender. I ended up putting this in because there are a lot more of the black-white enchantments and Esper decks that are utilizing the graveyard, especially Elspeth. And there also is other, like, mirror-based matchups with cats that Ashiok is good against. And even there's some times that I have targeted myself just to YOLO for a cat. That comes into play, but again, this is really in here for specific matchups. I'll bring it in versus blue-green as well, so just so they can't finale. I found that this is actually a pretty good card versus searching libraries. So if they can't 2-drop that finale, a lot of times Ashiok, or 2-drop a card with finale, Ashiok Dreamrender is pretty decent. They can still do the pump 10 mana into it though, so keep that in mind with finale. But it tends to be those Cavalier green decks self-mill themselves a lot. I've won some games just with Ashiok being able to mill them, and then they don't have enough resources left. So, like, you'll be surprised at how many games you'll play against your opponents where they have to use like 40 of their cards, and a card like Ashiok with 5 activations with 4, it could be the difference between just milling them out or not. A lot of the control-based decks that do have some way of getting cards back from graveyard will absolutely use this card. We're seeing a lot more of that Elspeth. Why can't I think of that? The white enchantment 5-drop where you exile permanent, convert mana cost 3. And let's pull it up here. What's that dumb card called? Elspeth. Elspeth Conquers Death. So this one, it's Ashiok's been pretty good against decks that are using this as their kind of win con by getting back their Ashioks or whatnot. So if you can exile their graveyard, this actually isn't that big of a threat because, you know, it's really getting that Planeswalker back for the second time that's going to be the difference. So I do like Ashiok versus Elspeth Conquers Death decks. Let's see here. So last card in here is Cavalier of Night. Cavalier of Night used to be a 3 of to a 2 of. I still like it. It's bringing it versus Black Red Sacrifice as another way to kill the Mayhem Devils and give you the lifelink. I'll bring it versus Mono Red. I'll bring it versus Knights. I'll bring it in versus any sort of aggressive green deck. Not really blue-green ramp. I won't bring it in versus that, but I'll bring it versus anything that I need to kill. Like absolutely have to kill because it's a threat that needs to be solved. I have liked this as a 2-of, but again, I'm trying to make my sideboard more versatile against the meta isn't so focused right now. It seems to be, you know, 10, 15 decks you're going to consistently come across. And so I think that when you don't have a so focused meta, you need to have a wide variety of cards in your sideboard. And that's why Cavalier's been ditched down to 1 of. Still love this card. It's got great synergy with bringing back a threat like a Midnight Reaper or a Yara for 3 mana. It's pretty good at bringing back a Priest of Forgotten Gods. There have been plenty of times where I've been able to top deck a Cavalier, kill one of my opponent's creatures, and then have a Witch's Ovens out, so then sacrifice my Cavalier of Night at the end of their turn, bring back a Priest of Forgotten Gods, which has been around for a turn, so then it doesn't have Summoning Sickness, then activate it and get rid of their second threat. So that is a very that play has happened quite a bit over the past few games. So I do like the 1 of. The reason why I didn't want to have too many of these is because 5 is very tough for a 20 line deck to actually consistently cast. But that's basically the deck tech right now. I've had a lot of other cards like Disfigures. It's funny, it's because it's still the icon of this deck. I've had Disfigure in the deck before. I've had the Riders, Midnight Riders, isn't that what it's called? The Murderous Riders. I've had Murderous Riders in the mix before. Let's see here. I've had Spawns. Spawns have been in here, Spawn of Mayhems. It's really good if you need to be aggressive. Like if we went back to like a Fires of Invention deck, this is a card that comes out the turn they're going to be wanting to utilize Deafening Clarion and then survives it, and they can actually out-aggro them at that point. So Spawn was good. Like, we are really spoiled at this point for this deck because there are plenty of cards that I think are viable for this particular strategy. Orzhov, this is one I recently cut. These used to be a powerhouse when, like, there were some decent green decks, Orzhov Enforcer, because this was just a card they'd have to get through, and then it actually would bring back a black-white spirit, which is actually relevant for a Yara, and so Death Touch and bring back a 1/1 flyer. A 1/1 flyer could also trigger the Spectacle on drill bits and then be evasive versus plenty of other decks. So I did like Orzhov Enforcer, but like I said, we are spoiled right now of options that can go in this deck. Basically, this deck is focused on, like, my version is that Priest of Forgotten Gods is really the focal point of this particular one in this particular meta, because that curve of going second turn Priest into a third turn Woe Strider or Lazotep Reaver is extremely good right now in the meta. So again, I'm gearing it towards that, and it's like Orzhov Enforcer is just strictly worse at that point than Woe Strider or Lazotep Reaver. But again, you need to tune this depending on your meta. There's no one size fits all for anyone's meta, any GP. That's why the pros are always, fiddling with things and messing things based on the current meta and what they deem is going to see the most play. So anyway, very, very long deck tech. I'll have to get some gameplay in a few days with this if I decide I am tired. If I can see, my eyes are probably red. I've been playing, man. I signed, like, this is how much not of a gamer I am. I think I was on a 4-hour binge, and man, that's a long time gaming for an old man like me. So anyway, we'll get some gameplay for it, and we'll get some other decks. I've been messing around with plenty of other cards from the especially the top 10 list that I released, and we're going to hit all of them in deck techs, and we'll go back to Pioneer too. I'll load up the MTGO and start doing some Pioneer matchups there. I have Modern too that I want to try Heloed with Soul Sister, so be looking forward to that. Hey, hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.